Perhaps the most famous institution throughout the history of East Germany was its secret police force, the Ministry for State Security, better known as the Stasi. Now, the Stasi are well known mostly because of how incredibly effective they were at their jobs. That being the suppression of dissent, spying on the broader East German population and conducting espionage across the Western world. But how did the Stasi work? Where did it come from and what happened to it after the reunification of Germany? Well, the Stasi was founded in 1950, 1 year after East Germany itself, with a man called Wilhelm Seisser at the helm. Seisser tried to remove the East German First Secretary Walter Ulbricht in 1953 but failed and so was himself ousted. He was replaced by Ernst Vollweber, who was shortly afterwards replaced himself by Erich Mielke, who kept his job until 1989. All three of these men were former Soviet intelligence agents and were seen to be loyal to Moscow, which was the point. The intelligence agencies founded across the Eastern Bloc at this point were first and foremost loyal to the centre of the communist world and not their own nations. The Stasi was founded not to protect East Germany itself, but to protect the interests of the Socialist Unity Party therein, although those in charge would have undoubtedly argued that those were the same thing. In fact, one of the issues the Stasi had at the beginning of its inception was that it could only recruit fresh people and not intelligence veterans. Why? Well, because all of Germany's previous intelligence officers had worked for the Third Reich and thus were seen as untrustworthy. So how was the Stasi organised? Well, Mielke stood at the top of the Stasi and reported directly to the communist leadership from the Stasi headquarters in East Berlin. Most of its operations were focused on East Germany itself except for one section, the HVA, which conducted international espionage. This was mostly focused on West Germany and ultimately this is something the Stasi were very good at. It operated its own well-trained guards unit, maintained jails for political prisoners and spied on soldiers to make sure none of them disagreed with the government. Of course, the Stasi's primary role was to spy on the East German population, and boy did it. At its height in the 1980s, the Stasi had over 90,000 official employees backed up by several 100,000 informants out of a population of just over 16 million. Those who complained too often or were seen as being outright hostile to the communist leadership would often find themselves as political prisoners. The Stasi also routinely intercepted and monitored communications between people, especially those between East and West Germany. And it focused a lot of resources on catching people who were illegally consuming West German media. The level of surveillance in East Germany was remarkably high, and most citizens there were at some point or another on the receiving end of Stasi inquiries, which is why it was so hated by the East German population. Yet, despite staggering levels of surveillance, the Stasi were unable to prevent or predict the 1989 revolution. And the reason why was that they overestimated the commitment of everyday East Germans to communism. The Stasi assumed that membership of the Social Unity Party meant that a person liked communism, whereas actually people joined it to advance their careers. Thus, when Gorbachev left East Germany to its own devices and the people there started to demand reforms, the Stasi thought that it wouldn't go anywhere. Thus, when party members and leading officials started to demand change, particularly with respect to the security forces, the Stasi were blindsided. After reunification, those who would work for the Stasi were, for the most part, fired, and there were attempts to prosecute Stasi higher-ups, but the vast majority of these went nowhere. In 1990, the Stasi was disbanded, yet its legacy and the reputation of its workers is still fiercely debated in Germany today. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching, with extra thanks to these patrons you can see on screen for their continued support. And an extra special thanks to James Bisonet, David Archaeologist, Azarka Flash, Danny Maloney, Party Boyko, Kulin Castleman, Rob Waterhouse, Chris Wicker, Gustav Swan, David Silverman, Winston Kaywood, Christian Cheke, Maggie Paxkowski, Lexi Schwinn, Anthony Beckett, Robert Wetzel, Sky Chappelle, Ike, Spinning 3 Plates, Aaron the White and Michael Reynolds.